Okay, so our scene is done, and I've loaded it up from disk here. Now we'll take a look at how to render this and incorporate it into a background plate. So I've prepared a background plate for this. Unfortunately, that cannot get included in the downloads here because it's a copywritten image. I got the image from textures.com, so you can search for that plate and then download it and prepare it yourself. I've just kind of extended the sky a little bit on it, but I'm going to go into the actually I need to do it on the camera tab. So let me go onto our camera here. Let's make sure our .NET's turned off. So we'll go to our camera here, and under background image, I go to text, and I'm going to grab my background plate here. And now I can see my background plate. So I'm just going to turn this off a little bit and just kind of match the angle. And honestly, I'm just kind of guessing here at the horizon line. And we'll put this explosion right about here. Tilt up just a little bit. Okay. So we'll start by preparing a render node. I'm going to type mantra. And let me just check our camera here. We'll do 960, 540. Objects, I'm going to force in our dirt hit import. I'm also going to create a ground plane, so I'm going to type grid, and we'll call that ground, and we'll make that 30 by 30. I think that should be big enough for our needs. That is going to be a matte object. So the ground, what we can do is dive in here, and we'll do a UV texture. And I'm going to choose perspective from camera, and we will choose camera 1. If we go to our shop network, actually material palette, I'm going to just grab a mantra surface for that. And we'll call that ground. We are going to turn off the diffuse, turn off reflections, and just go to emission, use a color map, and we will use our background plate. Go to our material tab for ground, and we will assign that. Now I just want to make sure that that's actually visible here. So what I'm going to do, let's just turn that off for previewing, go to our shop network. I'm going to copy this parameter here, and in OpenGL, for our texture here, I'm going to paste the relative reference. Okay, for some reason it doesn't like it if we have any OGL emission in there. So strange. Let's just unlink that stuff. We'll say OGL diffuse is 1. And as well, make sure that this is just for viewport display, has no effect on rendering. So I'm going to turn off use map. And we actually have no diffuse here. So pure emission there. Okay, now that we're in shop network, we need a pyro. And on our dirt hit, we're going to choose pyro. Let's open a new render. What am I looking for here? Render view. Where is that? Oh, sorry, new floating panel. Thank you. And here we want a render view. And before I get into this, I'm just going to match the lighting a little bit. So let's delete the area light out of here. And this is going to be a little bit expensive to render. But I'm going to set it up with an environment skylight rather. And my redraw is going very, very slowly. So I think I'm going to have to limit our viewport resolution here just so that we can work a little bit faster. So let's bring this down to 90. Okay, so we can add in skylight here. I'm going to turn off visibility of our ground plane. We don't need to see that. And what I'll do is I will add a sphere here just to help us as a guide. In terms of matching the lighting. So if we look for a lighting cue here, we can see we have this rock and there's a little bit of shadow coming off of it here. And there are a few other places that we can look for some lighting cues. So what we see is that the light is coming almost directly overhead, but slightly off to the right. So if we work with our skylight here, we should be able to get somewhere close to that. Maybe somewhere around there. And just check our output and make sure that we have all lights available, which we do. And let's make sure that I've assigned the pyro. I have. Go into our shop network. And we actually don't have any of those things. We just have density. And I don't think there's any presets that we want to start with here. Nope, just plain density. So let's click render. Now I'm going to click on our camera here. And what I want is to disable the background image because I only want that available in the viewport. But now here in the render setting, I'm going to press D and we'll go to background here. I'm going to select our plate and hit apply. So I can get a preview of our smoke on top of the background. It's not casting shadows. We have to do that as a separate pass. But we can at least see if the color's matching. And if you remember from the previous lesson, we have to enable transparency here. So I'll just take a snapshot to record where we started. Then we'll go into our Pyro shader and we'll start tweaking. So let's start with smoke color. And we want to try to match that. I'm not sure if we can do this. I'm not sure it'll let us. In fact, it won't. Thought we could use the color picker there, but it seems like we have to kind of just eyeball it here. I'll select just a small portion here just to try to match the color. Pretty close. We could go a little bit brighter. So before, after. Take a snapshot. Now we can play around with our densities here. So we can try our fit range. We played around with this a little bit in our visualization in order to kind of beef up the results we were seeing. I'm as well going to go to our import here, and in my render settings I'm going to change the filtering to Blackman. Maybe that gives us some more values there. Take a quick snapshot. For limits, I'm going to dial everything here down. Go back to our sampling. And let's see if adjusting our volume quality helps us out here as well. Negligible, so we'll keep it at 0.25. So we can use a lookup ramp as well. And we'll have to dial up our final scale from that lookup ramp. Let's see about clamping at the upper and lower limits here. Now I'm just going to slide this down a little bit and just try to enhance the edges. We'll look just here. Increase density just a touch more. Let's zoom out. Turn preview back on. I'm going to shift click outside here. And now we've increased density quite a bit from where we were before. Maybe I'll start playing with some of these sources here, source range, to try to clamp some of that back down. Keep in mind, when we start clamping the low end, we're going to have a pretty harsh fall off in terms of this dissipation. Okay, go back to general here. And now we can start adjusting shadow density. So we can give the appearance of a lot of light passing through the smoke. So it's kind of like thick smoke, but light disperses through it. It doesn't quite have the same contrast level. So this is a bit more like sand. We can do a little scattering here, play around with forward and backward scattering. So let's try a little bit of back scattering. Okay, color-wise, I think we're pretty close to where we need to be. Let's check quality. So I'm going to turn off preview. I'm just going to take a look at a small area here. Because we have that environment light, which is doing a lot of shading work for us, it's fairly expensive. But in terms of matching it into this plate, you know, I want to make sure that there's light coming from all over, like you would expect to see from a wide open shot like this. Take a quick look at the alpha channel. So I can see some grain here. That's going to be taken care of with increasing stochastic transparency, but in order to conserve some render time, I think we're just going to leave this as it is. Let's take a look at one other frame. So let's go to something like frame 30, for instance. Turn on preview. We're not really checking quality here, we're just checking what the overall scene is going to render like. Sorry, I seem to be stuck on those buckets there. So it looks okay. I think maybe we can come down on density just a little bit. Try 0.7 for density. Just feel like it could be a little sandier looking. All right, I'll live with that. So I'm going to pause and kill that render. And let's call this dust hit beauty. And we are going to render frame range 1 to 40 using camera number 1. Images, render dust hit beauty. Now we'll prepare the shadow pass. We don't need that. I'm going to just copy and paste dust hit beauty. And we'll call this ground shadows. And for this, we're going to use a thing called a take. So I'm going to select window, take list, and this allows us to have alternate properties that get switched on with different renders. So I'm going to add a take, and we'll call this ground shadows. And just selecting this take makes it active, but I want to make sure we're in our main take here first. So what I want to do is go to our material palette, and we will go to our utilities, and we will grab a shadow matte. We'll go back up to our object, select ground. Now activate the ground shadow take, and you can see that this is grayed out. We're going to right click here, choose include in take, and that makes it active. And you can see now this indicates that during this take we are overriding this material here. I'm going to select the shadow matte material. That's all we need to do, and then make sure when you're done with that you go back to your main take. If we select our shop network shadow matte, that's going to basically turn this ground plane into a shadow catcher. So you'll see what that does when we render it. Go to out, go to our dust hit ground shadows, and here there's a toggle here for render with take. We want to select ground shadows. So when we hit render, it's going to activate that take and do the material swap for us. Now for our objects, what we want to do is have our dirt hit import be a phantom object. That means it's going to cast shadows, it's going to show in reflections, but it won't actually render visibly to the camera. We'll delete that, and we'll just put our ground in the forced matte. And I want to make sure that I change our render path here. And we'll call this dust hit ground shadows. $f4.exr. And with dust hit beauty as well, I want to go into our extra image planes. And just like we did in the previous one, we will put direct volume in here. And we will export a variable for each light. We don't need to do that for ground shadows. So let's go to our ground shadows here, and we will click render. Now if you look at the alpha channel, this is what we're going to be seeing. So our beauty is going to be black, but the alpha channel is going to have all this shadow information in it. And when we composite, what will happen is we're going to just use this alpha channel to color correct the background. And we can see a little bit of noise in here, but we're just going to live with that for now, just because I want to kick out some renders. But this is most likely going to be fixed with either increasing the sampling of our skylight here. If we go to light and sampling quality for render options, it's either going to be in there or it's going to be by increasing either pixel samples or ray samples, decreasing noise level. There's a bunch of different ways we can deal with this. Probably the quickest is decreasing noise level, but I don't know how successful that's going to be. That is going to have 0 level of success. We can increase pixel samples for sure. And that's just going to send more global samples out, which you can see smooths the results out considerably. Not necessarily the most efficient way of dealing with that, but it's one that works for sure with a little guesswork. So now that that's good, I'm going to stop that. I think I'd like our shadows to have a little more contrast in there, so I'm just going to go to Pyro, shadow density. I'm just going to up that back up to like 0.8, and we can kind of play with the gamma, I think, when we're in comp. So we'll go to our output. I'm going to save here. And I'm just going to make these two render together. So I'm going to just wire them up to each other. And then we are going to select the bottom one and click render to disk. Now it's going to start rendering both of these. It'll render one frame of this, then one frame of this, then one frame of this, then one frame of this, until they're all done. And this way I can start throwing together a comp pretty quickly rather than having to wait for one full pass to finish, then another one. Because I think our render time's going to be pretty significant for this. So we'll be back in a couple hours, I think.